Let's just follow Kemper's path for a second. The abuse from his mother, it just never stopped. His own father wanted nothing to do with him, so he gets sent to his grandparents. And at just 15, he murders them. And then, in what has to be one of the most catastrophic failures of the system, he's eventually released right back into his mother's care. His victims became stand-ins for his mother, the very type of smart, successful woman she always told him would never, ever want him.
You know, it's the question we all ask ourselves whenever we hear about these acts of true evil. Are people born this way, or does something happen to make them this way? Is it just bad wiring in their DNA, or is it something they learn from the worlds they grow up in? Well, let's see what this material has to say. So in this explainer, we're going to zero in on 5 names you definitely know: Edmund Kemper, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Albert Fish, and Henry Lee Lucas. We're on the hunt for the common threads, right? The shared psychological wounds that might just explain the horrors they would later unleash on the world. And our investigation, it starts with the very first relationship anyone ever has. Yeah, we're starting with the most fundamental bond a person can have, the one with their mother. But for these men, that first connection wasn't about love or safety. No, for them, it was poison. When you look at the source material, this maternal cruelty really breaks down into 2 horrific categories. On one hand, you've got this relentless psychological warfare, being told over and over again that you're worthless, that you're a freak, just like Edmund Kemper was. And then on the other side, you have the most brutal kind of physical exploitation imaginable, the kind Henry Lee Lucas lived through. 2 very different methods, but both led to the exact same place, a deep, profound sense of being less than human.
Let's just follow Kemper's path for a second. The abuse from his mother, it just never stopped. His own father wanted nothing to do with him, so he gets sent to his grandparents. And at just 15, he murders them. And then, in what has to be one of the most catastrophic failures of the system, he's eventually released right back into his mother's care. His victims became stand-ins for his mother, the very type of smart, successful woman she always told him would never, ever want him.
And if you want to understand just how deep that rage went, look no further than this quote from Kemper himself. He explained why he buried one of his victims' heads in his mother's garden facing her window. He said, "She always wanted people to look up to her." I mean, it's just the most twisted, grotesque act of obedience you can imagine. Okay, so that's one side of the coin. But what about the fathers? Well, they played a huge role too. And just like with the mothers, that damage came in 2 forms, sometimes through active, brutal abuse, and sometimes through a complete and total absence. You know, John Wayne Gacy's entire life was basically a performance for an audience of one, his abusive, alcoholic dad. Every insult, every beating, it just made Gacy more and more desperate for a single drop of validation. He was so scared of his dad, he couldn't even tell him he was being abused by someone else. And that one single moment of approval he finally got, it was just too little, way too late. The damage was already done. But abuse isn't always about fists and insults. Sometimes it's about nothing at all. For Jeffrey Dahmer, the damage came from something much quieter. His father didn't beat him. He just didn't see him. The wound wasn't from violence. It was from a deep, profound neglect that created this bottomless fear of being abandoned. And this comparison is so key to understanding this. You've got Gacy's father, who through active abuse creates a man desperate for approval. Then you have Dahmer's father, who through passive neglect creates a man absolutely terrified of being alone. One saw his son as a failure to be beaten down. The other dismissed collecting roadkill as scientific curiosity, completely failing to see the giant flashing red light. 2 totally different failures, both ending in the complete destruction of their son's humanity. So we've talked about the psychological damage, but for some of these men, the horror was physical. I mean, on a level that's almost impossible to imagine. Their childhoods literally rewired their brains to connect pain, pleasure, and survival in the most horrifying ways. Take Albert Fish. His mom thinks she's doing the right thing, placing him in St. John's orphanage to save him. But what she really did was send him straight into a house of horrors, a place where sadistic beatings were just part of the daily routine. And for a little boy, that constant abuse basically short-circuited his brain, fusing the ideas of pain and excitement into one, a sick obsession he would chase for the rest of his life. 29. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is how many needles doctors found stuck inside Albert Fish's pelvis when he was an adult. It's just a shocking physical monument to a lifelong obsession with pain and a direct result of what he learned in that orphanage. And then there's Henry Lee Lucas. I mean, his own body was like a roadmap of his childhood abuse. He wasn't just neglected, he was systematically destroyed. His own mother literally watched his eye rot out of his head. And his father, the one person who might have been able to protect him, he was completely powerless and eventually just froze to death. The lesson Lucas learned was brutal and simple. His body wasn't his, it was just a thing to be used, broken, and thrown away.
So this brings us to the breaking point. You have this lifetime of unimaginable trauma. How does that finally ignite into murder? Now we're going to connect the dots and see the moments these men crossed that final line, from victim to predator. Kemper's life is a perfect and terrifying example of this escalation. It starts small, with animal cruelty, a huge warning sign. Then it escalates to murdering family members who are basically stand-ins for his mother. Then he starts targeting women who remind him of his mother, before finally he gets to the source of all his rage.
But for Jeffrey Dahmer, the breaking point wasn't a bang, it was a whisper. It was the sound of a door closing and him being left completely, totally alone. At 18 years old, his absolute worst fear came true. Both of his parents were gone. And that empty space they left behind is what he spent the rest of his life trying to fill, with horrific results.
And his own words tell you everything you need to know about the twisted logic that followed. His crimes weren't really about hate. They were about a sick, desperate need to stop people from leaving him. He wasn't trying to destroy his victims. In his mind, he was trying to possess them forever. This one is just absolutely bone-chilling. Henry Lee Lucas knew what he was. After doing time for murdering his own mother, he literally told the authorities who were releasing him that he was not safe to be let out. They didn't listen, and he proved them tragically wrong within hours. So when you put all these pieces together, the picture that emerges is just undeniable. Yes, their actions were monstrous and inexcusable, but where they came from, it becomes terrifyingly clear. This isn't a story about random evil. It's a story of cause and effect. And this slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? For every single one of these killers, you can draw a straight line back to a specific catastrophic childhood trauma. Kemper had maternal rejection. Dahmer had abandonment. Gacy had an abusive father. Fish had institutional sadism. And Lucas had complete dehumanization. These aren't just sad stories. According to the source material, they're the actual ingredients. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that the cycle of abuse isn't just a theory, it's real. When you teach a child that they are worthless, when you show them that pain and pleasure are the same thing, or that love is something violent and conditional, they don't just forget it. They learn, they adapt, and sometimes they become the very monster that destroyed them. And that brings us to the most unsettling thought of all. This material explains how these men were made. And if the recipe is this consistent, if it's this clear, it forces us to ask a terrifying question. How many more are being made right now?